Mythos Busters, investigating the mystery, monsters, and madness of Arkham Horror, the card game.
Hello and welcome to this very special Mythos Extra, where today we solemnly swear we're up to no good. I'm Sean. Joining me is Ian.
Hello. Hailing from House Slytherin, of course.
Oh, of course.
The green one.
Of course. Scott, what house will you be representing today?
Ravenclaw, I believe, is the sciencey, nerdy one.
Mm-hmm. That's fair.
Yeah.
See, I have no idea where I would be sorted. I haven't bothered to go take the Pottermore test, because apparently that's what everyone swears by. I would like to think that the sorting hat is a little bit more complicated than an online mailing list algorithm, but yeah, who knows. And joining us as well for this special Mythos Busters Extra is one Matthew Newman. Hi, Matt.
Hi, everyone.
How are you today?
Good. I guess I'm Griffin Puff.
Griffin Puff?
Or like Hufflepuff.
Like, I know Hufflepuff is like the redheaded stepchild of the houses. No one wants to claim Hufflepuff, but you know what? Every clique needs a Hufflepuff.
I feel like I'm actually probably like Slitherpuff.
Slitherpuff.
That would be such a weird mix.
Sounds really weird, but
That was the name of my J-pop metal band in high school, by the way.
No one wants to claim that they're Slytherin, but
Right.
some people just are, right?
That's fair.
Yeah.
I could see myself being sorted into Slytherin, because the problem is, like, the books, there had to be some okay Slytherins, right? Slytherin's all just about cunning and ambition. Like,
Then
you
this
could be an
became a
okay guy.
Harry Potter podcast all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's
I mean, that's how
totally agree.
that's how I interpret it. But then I was watching the last movie recently, and stuff pops off with Voldemort, and then they're like, escort the entire House Slytherin to the dungeon. I'm like, oh, okay.
It's like a very World War II internment camp type move.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Good lord. Anyway,
Right.
so today we've got Matt here to talk to us a little bit about the Carcosa cycle and the craziness therein, I suppose. So I guess to kick it off, where I suppose any conversation of this magnitude should start, where did the idea for Carcosa start for this campaign? Like, of the breadth of the mythos, what made you decide that, yeah, we're doing King in Yellow?
Well, so it was kind of like once we started getting late enough in the Dunwich Legacy cycle that we were starting to outline future cycles. It was a matter of, what ancient one are we going to focus on and what setting are we going to do? And since I basically had that choice, I decided to pick my favorite.
Okay, so it's more of a personal favorite.
Yeah, Hastur is probably my favorite ancient one, or at least in my top, top two, top three. And the story that I wanted to tell was something that was exciting to me. And as a creator, I feel like doing what excites you is, at any given moment, whatever that be, is going to make the best product. So
I'd recommend that approach as a player, too.
Yeah, that's true. But anyway, yeah, so like I basically said, here's my pitch for this cycle, and it was approved pretty quickly, so we just went on from there.
I suppose I should back up for a quick second. Spoiler alert to anyone out there who has not completed the Path to Carcosa cycle. Yeah, it would have been a fun surprise if we start talking about the end of Dim Carcosa without a proper spoiler warning. So if you haven't finished the campaign, we're going in deep here. So maybe pause it and come back later.
Yeah.
So you said the story you wanted to tell. Like, where did that coalesce? Is that something you've kind of been thinking about since the core set was made, or?
Yeah, a little bit. So before we started working on Arkham at all, I kind of reread. I read a lot of the Mythos stories that I hadn't read, and I reread all the ones that I knew about. And of all of them, The King in Yellow was one of, if not my favorite. So I kind of wanted to... I was really inspired by the idea of, as I mentioned in the design notes at the end of Dim Carcosa, of telling like an unreliable narrator story in a card game. Because that's something that I don't know if that's been done before. And like what does that mean to do that in a card game? And those are also the kind of horror stories that I like. So I was really excited by that, and that's kind of why Carcosa was second in line.
Okay.
Yeah. It might have been first in line if it weren't for the fact that I think for the first campaign it was important that we do something that's that's kind of a not simple, but like more traditional, like more along the lines of what you would expect from Arkham.
Well, Dunwich kind of pivoted specifically off an actual Lovecraft narrative specifically.
Yeah.
So, you chose Hastur. Obviously the King in Yellow specifically was, I have to imagine, was the impetus for the unreliable narrator thing. Were there any other Carcosa related stories in the Mythos that you read? Anything else that kind of influenced that specifically? Because honestly, I read the King in Yellow in preparation for Carcosa, and I had never read it before. The details are sparse. Like any of the kind of like bedrock Mythos stories, it leaves so much to your imagination. Like, you get names, and that's about it, and everything else is like you just kind of figure it out. So were there any? I honestly don't know if the Mythos has fleshed out a whole lot of details for Hastur or Carcosa. Is that a thing?
It kind of depends on how far down the rabbit hole you go, because a lot of other authors have taken that sort of foundation and built upon it, and some more than others. So, like, another source would be the Hastur cycle by Robert Price, or edited by Robert Price, or something like that. But anyway, it's basically a compilation of short stories as well, some of which are in the King in Yellow, but some of which are other authors taking that and like building upon it, which is pretty typical of the overall Lovecraft Cthulhu mythos. So some of the other stories that I really liked were An Inhabitant of Carcosa by Ambrose Bierce,
and that preceded the King in Yellow, right?
It did. Okay. Yeah. And a lot of times, what is Carcosa and what is Hastur, and like what do these terms mean, had different definitions based on the author. So like Carcosa, Hastur might not always be a person or a thing or a creature. And same thing with Carcosa and all the other terms that you probably saw in Dim Carcosa.
Okay.
So,
like Aldebaran came up a bit. Like, I'm just kind of like, I started reading those cards. I'm like, I like remember one little passing mention of Aldebaran in the actual King in Yellow.
Right.
Like, is that actually a thing? Is that like a neighborhood of Carcosa? Is that where the rich Carcosans live?
It's not clear. It's not clear because it kind of depends on the author and their interpretation. So, like, Aldebaran is a star, so it could be interpreted that Carcosa is like on a planet in this system, but it could also just be the name of a place within Carcosa or a place outside of Carcosa, like another city that's near it, or a lake, or that sort of thing. Okay. So it really does just depend on the author, and that all just only contributes to the weirdness and the idea that different people can take different interpretations of the story is also kind of inspired by that.
Sure.
Because different authors took different interpretations of other authors' stories as well. So, yeah.
So, I guess in your mind, obviously the tone is different with Carcosa and its inhabitants, but from a mechanical standpoint, did you kind of have a goal for, the cultists who are trying to open the path to Carcosa, they feel and operate X way as compared to just, the generic cultists from, Corset or Dunwich or whatever it happens to be?
Yeah, there was sort of this idea that they're trying to do something and you have to get in their way, more so than in like previous scenarios. So that's kind of where the idea that they're gathering clues too. That's where that idea came from, that like they're trying to open the path to Carcosa, and to an extent so are you, but although you don't really know that until later in the cycle.
Right.
So you're kind of both working to achieve the same goal while getting in the way of each other, and that led to some of the specific designs with like echoes of the past and the fanatics that gather clues and that sort of thing.
Okay.
Yeah. And as far as other themes, there were some overarching mechanical themes like sanity matters, investigating matters, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Matt, how did you decide the overall course of the story? Because this campaign takes us across much greater distance than both the Corset and Dunwich by a long shot, right? Like, we're going across the ocean. What led you to kind of take us on a global trip?
So partially inspired by the King in Yellow stories, which were often set in Paris, and I wanted to sort of capture that same setting and that same theme. So I wrote down like, yeah, we'll go to Paris, And then as I started fleshing out the outline of the scenarios more and more, that became, all right, what are some other places near Paris or in Paris that we can do? Oh, we got to do the catacombs. Got to do the catacombs, right? Like, that's perfect. Sorry, we'll do the catacombs. And then it was our fiction editor, Katrina Ostrander, who suggested Mont Saint Michel as a setting because it's just an awesome, awesome place. Like, if you look up pictures on the internet, it's just gorgeous. I've always wanted to go there. But also, it ties into the themes really well, where Mont Saint Michel is very similar to the fictional, like, mythical city of Ys, and Ys is really similar to Carcosa in a lot of ways. So it all just sort of ebbs and flows together in a weird way.
And it made for good art. I feel like
some fantastic
art.
I
feel like the Black Stars Rise set of art was easily at the top for me.
Yeah. And that was definitely something that the art department was excited for.
Yeah.
When I said we were going to Mont Saint Michel and that it was going to sort of meld with Carcosa, they were like wholly on board with that.
I don't know if they solicit you for opinions on what they do for playmats in the future, but if it all matters, I would give a +1 to the Worlds Collide art on a playmat.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. There's so many good art pieces from that cycle. But yeah, so we kind of had the beginning in mind and we had the end in mind, and then the middle just sort of fleshed out as we figured out what are we going to do, to get to each scenario. And I think the Asylum was also very much right from the first draft of the outline. Like, well, we got to go to an insane asylum. So yeah,
this Carcosa and everything about it is so much about it specifically making you go, for lack of a better term, mad.
Yeah, and so many characters that encounter the King in Yellow end up in an insane asylum.
Yes.
So it only made perfect sense.
I think the interesting thing is looking at it, because of course Dunwich is mechanically has a lot of horror too, but it's interesting seeing how the horror that each ancient one kind of puts out in the world does different things in a way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
like the horror of Dunwich is more about just kind of this like total unreality of everything and discarding your deck, of course, and it's just kind of forcing this weird pressure, whereas Carcosa seems like it's really about like mentally messing with the investigators to the point of they don't know what's real or not. So
yeah, in a weird way, I almost want to say like Dunwich is like a physical horror, because you got like the big beast.
That's a good way of putting it.
I'm dealing with something I can somewhat see and touch, whereas Carcosa is like a mental horror, because you just don't understand what's going on.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It's another way of examining it is just when you think about horror and madness, like a sanity score isn't really representative of like going insane.
Yeah,
I mean, like, in real life you don't have a
what you're telling me mental health is not a straight continuum. It seems so simple.
Yeah, so it was important to me that each cycle and each ancient one kind of dealt with that in different ways, while at the same time mechanically there's never going to be a scenario in Arkham where you're not taking horror.
Right,
so that's always going to be a thing, but why are these guys scary is going to be different for each of them, for sure.
So is the whole kind of dealing with madness and the unreliable narrator, is that where the idea for Doubt and Conviction came in? Like, at what point did you decide kind of that was the mechanic that was going to mechanically... Mm-hmm. That was a very Austin Powers-y line right there, but that was going to represent, that piece of it.
That came about pretty early on in the design, and it was inspired mostly by the first story in The King in Yellow, which is The Repairer of Reputations, which features, that's where the unreliable narrator element is kind of the most present.
And it sets the tone so well.
It sets the tone for it definitely sets the tone for the whole thing, and the whole tension of that story is what this person is what this narrator is saying real or not, and there is no right answer. So you could read that story and be like, yeah, I think it was, or you could read that story and think, no, it clearly wasn't. And other movies and books have dealt with that as well. I only started reading this after I worked on Carcosa, which is unfortunate, but I started reading The House of Leaves.
Okay.
And
I love that book.
It's so good. First of all, it's amazing. But second of all, a big element of that book is it's about this movie, and the events of the movie might have happened, or maybe they didn't. Who knows? So that's kind of another like prominent horror story that deals with that theme. Basically the idea was, all right, let's make the player's interpretation, not just the investigator's interpretation, but the actual person playing it. Let's make their interpretation of things matter mechanically. And that led to the doubt/conviction.
And that was an interesting way to do it, because I thought it was brilliant that it definitely plays into those moments where you're like, do I burn the party down? Without confirming or denying what you're seeing, right?
Yeah. And I remember early on people were thinking that one path was going to be, like the right path or something. And it was always intentional that neither path is correct, because that way you can go back and play it again.
Yeah, I was about to say, you can metagame the crap out of it if there was a correct way to go.
Yeah. It was also important to me that once you start going down one path, you're not incentivized to just only do that path. You can kind of you can end the campaign with 4 and 4, and that's like fine. There's no penalty for doing that. So
I think the good thing about it too was that though framing it as doubt and conviction just means that it's just a measure of how your investigators are responding to it, and not how much everything is true. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like, if you're full conviction, that doesn't mean it's true. It just means you really believe the things that you've seen and taking them at face value, versus, the doubt route, which is kind of being more skeptical of what's happening.
Yeah. Although it's worth noting that by the end, it will play out sort of the way that you expect it to, based on your... Like, if you go the full conviction route, then it will... there's multiple interpretations of everything, which is on purpose. Yes. But the major interpretation of the conviction route is, yep, it was real. You figured it out. And the major interpretation of the doubt path is...
Was that a dream?
You were right. It wasn't real. But it all kind of was at the same time.
Yeah.
Which is purposeful, because it sends an interesting message, I think, about the nature of delusion, where, like, if you're paranoid enough to believe it's real, it might as well be.
Yeah.
For all intents and purposes.
God damn it, I didn't expect we'd be getting into abstract, objectivism in this episode so quickly.
Yeah, we're what, 10 minutes in?
I guess that kind of leads to the question of how, when designing the cycle, because there are these kind of moments in Unspeakable Oath and the Asylum and burning down the house that kind of mess with players and even some of the mechanics. Like, how do you ride the line between trying to kind of mess with players and push that unreliable narrator, and avoiding confusion or frustration, and kind of how you design it?
Yeah, that's a good point, because that was always a concern right from the very beginning. Like, if we're going to do unreliable narrator and it's going to meld into the gameplay a little bit, we don't want people to just not actually know how a scenario plays out, or how, like, a particular ability works. And that, I think mostly that just kind of came in through playtesting. Right? Like, if we play tested something over and over again and everyone said, yeah, no, it seemed to work pretty fine, I didn't have any errors, then cool, it worked. And if there was a lot of questions or confusion about something, then I would maybe go in and tweak it a little bit. And if there was maybe just a little bit of confusion, then that's fine. Because that's the feeling that I maybe wanted to evoke. Yeah. A lot of what I do is trying to elicit specific feelings. So if the feeling is confusion but maybe not frustration, then that's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as they could still, like, finish the scenario. If that makes sense.
Speaking of, so let's talk about the scenario specifically a little bit. So starting out with Curtain Call, I can't speak for anyone else, but
what
I found
dick punch. Hey?
Well put, Scott. I found Curtain Call to be way over and above difficulty-wise compared to where Dunwich started with either. I have specific feelings on how easy Dunwich can start depending on which order you do it in, but either way, whether you do extracurricular activity or House Always Wins, I feel like Dunwich started out a little bit more of a slow burn. Was was kind of the spike in difficulty intentional in Curtain Call, or did it just kind of end up being that way because those were the mechanics you wanted to have in there?
A little bit of both. So to a certain extent, it wasn't intentional in that a lot of so in those first two scenarios, a lot of the cards are going to be coming from those encounter sets, because they have a much higher density of encounter set cards and less like Curtain Call specific cards, right? And those encounter set cards have to be hard enough that they carry the difficulty through for the rest of the cycle. And those are cards that are often being tweaked like right up until the end of playtesting. So to a certain extent, it was difficult because of that. And that was something that I was okay with. So it ended up in a place where I was thinking to myself, yeah, it's harder than the other ones, and I'm fine with that. But also, at the same time, it was a little bit intentional in that I felt that maybe extracurricular activities...
Yeah, see, it's hard, isn't
I know,
it?
it is hard to say. EA and Thaw,
Yes.
the house always wins, were maybe a little bit easier because I felt like a larger percentage of people were coming right off of the core set and haven't maybe played a ton of games. Maybe they've only played 3 times.
Sure.
And so they're going into the house always wins with their 4th game, and it needs to be
Their one core Agnes deck.
right. Yeah, it needs to be an enjoyable experience. So, and I think a much higher percentage of people playing the Path to Carcosa have played at least more than 4 games, right? They've probably played the core set a couple times. They've maybe played the whole Dunwich cycle. Maybe they haven't. Maybe they skipped straight to Path to Carcosa because you can. But either way, the game's been out long enough that they've probably played more than just 3 times. So I felt like the difficulty ramp was justified.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think also, like, as much as I say it was a dick punch, it wasn't so much that. It was, I think it was a wake-up call. It felt like, you know, it was like, oh, okay, I play the core, and now I can play it on, you know, expert if I want a big challenge, and oh, let's play Dunwich, and it's fun until the end, and then it gets a little bit tougher, and you're like, okay. And you're like, oh, Carcosa, let's have a fun little jaunt through, you know, Hoster's Playground. And then it's like, no, this is not going to be fun. Like, this is very difficult. You know,
Get slapped awake, bucket of ice cold water thrown in your face.
Yeah.
Fun for the investigator. I mean, but like, you know, like, as a player, I'm like, oh boy, wow, it's like, I got to bring my A game starting now. So.
And for me, challenging is fun. So
Absolutely.
For me, I was thinking, yeah, this is challenging. Good.
So now, as someone who plays, and especially when Carcosa first came out, I was playing still a ton of Agnes. I haven't done so much of that lately. But
Except for just earlier today.
Well, no, that was like my second. I think that's the second Agnes deck I've actually built since Carcosa came out. So it's been a while. But I think I'm a little bit more sensitive, as you may be aware of, when raw intellect is required. And I did notice a lot of that in Curtain Call specifically, but then throughout Carcosa kind of in general. Was that a specific design intent, or did that just kind of come about?
A little bit. Like I said earlier, one of the themes. So we scribbled down like a few like phrases. We kind of do that with every cycle. We'll scribble down some phrases, and those will become our design philosophies for that cycle. And one of them was investigating matters. Not, and by that I don't mean like you're gonna need lots of investigating skills or you're toast. I meant more like let's have investigating do more than just clues.
Sure.
So that tied into like the poltergeist that you can parlay with. That tied into the man in the pallid mask who you can investigate to get rid of him. The Spires of Carcosa. Yeah.
Oh god, the Spires.
Yeah. And
That's anti-Agnes tech right there.
right. So overall, it's not like a huge density of cards that
You made it matter.
Sure, yeah, and that was the intent. So that's good. But also just
My
having
name's
some
Sean. I
locations
only like
that,
one skill.
but also just having some locations that have like different styles of investigating on them.
Sure.
Like there's the one location in Curtain Call that you can investigate and get +3, but then you have to like lose your hand. That sort of thing.
Sure.
So there's a few more of those scattered throughout the cycle as well.
Or I'm thinking like the opera house in Phantom of Truth, where like it either doubles your base skill or it doubles icons on cards you chuck to it, but it has a really high shroud.
Yeah.
Things like that.
So speaking kind of on the the difficulty again, which, like you said, I enjoy challenging. Unspeakable Oath can just straight up lead to death for an investigator or the end of the story, kind of, for someone's player deck. How did you decide to include that, like, right in the middle of the campaign? Was that something you were a bit nervous about, or was that something, like, right from the beginning you were gung-ho to do? What's the story behind that?
It was pretty much planned from the beginning, and that was partially just I was really excited for the idea of that ending. It's not even an ending. It's worth noting that that's not meant to be like the end of the campaign, right?
Yeah,
you can keep playing, and in fact, that tends to be my favorite version of the campaign story, where the first people investigating it, they all went insane, and now you're coming in as the second group of investigators thinking, maybe this is a bad idea. Every person who investigates this seems to go insane. Let's investigate it. Right? It's like The Ring. It's like, why are you watching that movie?
Oh, God.
Not the actual movie, the movie in
God,
The Ring.
The Ring.
The Ring is great. Anyway, sorry, I went off track there.
Ring is like the only movie that's ever messed me up. I don't know if I ever told you this story.
Oh, really?
We talked about
No,
horror
I
before?
don't think so.
I feel like we've talked about horror before. I saw The Ring when I was like 17 goddamn years old. And like I could watch Silence of the Lambs and sleep alone in the woods at night, and I'd be fine. Like realistic stuff doesn't mess me up, but supernatural stuff does. So I watched The Ring, and at 17 years old, I was curled up at the foot of my parents' bed that night. Anyway,
one TV with static, and you're just
okay. So what I did is I was down in my room, and I had like this new metal playlist because it was like 2004 or whatever it was, and I had like 300 different songs on it. So I left my light on, I had music playing, and I just put it on shuffle just to keep my mind occupied. And like within the first 5 songs, I got Underwater Silence by Audio Vent, When I Drown, Darkness, just like all of these songs that just were making me think about what I was trying not to think about. Anyway, The Ring is terrifying.
Yeah, it is. But anyway, yeah, so it's that same kind of theme, though, of everyone who goes into this research, bad stuff happens to them, but still, even so, you're like inexplicably drawn to research it more. So like the original investigators did that, and now this new group is doing that too. Anyway, I've gotten a little off track, but my point is I really like that that ending. And also it just made perfect sense. It like if you're gonna have a scenario in Arkham Asylum, then I really feel strongly that one of the resolutions of that scenario should be, yup, you're institutionalized.
Yeah, especially when what you're doing to an outside observer could come off as a little kooky.
Absolutely.
And you're also unreliable to yourself. Like,
you're not even sure of what you're doing yourself.
You're running through the halls just like attacking people and stealing keys from nurses.
But he started it.
Yeah. And now you're like, I've got to get out. So it's, I mean, it only made perfect sense. And if we were ever going to do that ending, that was going to be the time to do it. That specific ending. I mean, not just the idea of an investigator getting, killed and
straight driven insane.
Right. Which it's worth noting too. That's, it's definitely not the first time we've done that. I mean, right there in The Gathering, that's possible. Rare, but possible. If you let Doom run out while you're still in Act 2, when you have the barrier.
Oh, and the house falls down?
You're trapped between a horde of ghouls and the barrier, and you are ripped to shreds and killed. Everyone's killed. That's in the very first scenario of the game. It's very rare, because the Doom threshold on that scenario is pretty
You have to be
generous.
pretty bad to let The Gathering get that far out of hand.
Not necessarily bad, but...
Or bad luck.
It's more like if this is your first time playing and you don't know how bad... running out of the agenda deck can get.
All right.
And you're just kind of
That's
like
your first time
taking it
playing.
really
You're probably
slow.
a bad player. I was.
Oh, jeez. I didn't say that. No, it's more just you're thinking, I've got all the time in the world, and then all of a sudden you don't have all the time in the world, and then all of a sudden you read the resolution and it says that you're killed, and that sends a pretty like defining message, I think, for the rest of the game.
This game's not messing around.
Exactly. Yeah.
What's funny is I didn't even know that was an ending
Yeah,
in the core
yes.
because I've never hit it.
It's
I know, when
pretty
he
rare.
said that, I looked at him like, what?
Yeah, it's pretty rare. I mean, it also just made sense for like, well, if you have a barrier that's preventing you from leaving, I can't very well just say, and then you escaped,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
and it's the same thing with Unspeakable Oath. If the whole, I feel like anytime there's a scenario where the whole point is to get out, and you can't resign, and the
Right.
whole point is to resign. It's kind of cheap when the ending, when you fail, is and then you got out somehow.
Hooray!
Yeah, I mean that's always going to be some of the endings sometimes, because I don't always want to murder investigators who didn't make it out. But yeah, I kind of prefer when the stakes are exactly what it says, right? Like, you've got to get out or you're going to die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because I remember my blind run, which was with York, which was not successful. But when I read that resolution, I was like half surprised, but also not surprised at
But
all.
also not
Because-
even
'cause
remotely
I-
surprised.
I feel like so many cues were dropped along the way with how they were reacting to you, and it's like even at the beginning they're kind of like ushering you in but fitting you for a straitjacket almost, like, oh, let's get this guy. Which is, I
is what
feel
it
like
felt
how Arkham Asylum is always depicted in all the stories, how they're kind of shady. So yeah, just along the way and kind of the sense of impending doom, I was like, okay, if this time runs out, I'm pretty sure that York is going to be stuck there forever insane, and sure enough. So yeah, I think it fit. And you know, obviously you can't do it every scenario, but I feel like when those scenarios happen, like, I can guarantee every play of Unspeakable Oath I ever have is pretty tense and exciting because of the stakes being so high.
Yeah, and I think it's important that there are those valleys and those peaks of tension where there's some scenarios where, worst case scenario, you'll take a trauma and maybe that's it. And then there's some scenarios where the stakes are a little bit higher because there's some story asset on the line, or some enemy that if you don't kill it, it's going to carry over into the next scenario, that kind of thing. And then there's the scenarios where the stakes are super, super duper high because your very life is on the line. And having that range, I think, is really important for a campaign as a whole.
Yeah.
And then you have the rogues that take the oboe and are just like in constant redlining mode.
And then every scenario has those stakes.
Yeah.
Just chasing the dragon, hey? Just...
Also, I wanted to point out, you mentioned the intro to that scenario. I'm really proud of the intro to that scenario because almost every single line of that intro can be read in two different ways.
Oh, god dang it. We will now do a dramatic reading. Oh, wait, of Unspeakable Oath specifically?
Yeah, of the point when they actually get into the, so like intro 3, that segment, you don't have to read the whole thing, but if you just do like one line, there's 2 readings of almost every single line in that intro, purposely.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm reading through it. That's as you enter the asylum, you stop to speak with the receptionist, though you feel your body urged to step deeper into the clutches of this madhouse.
Why is your body being urged to step deeper? Is
Why
it
do you
because you
feel
want
like
to
you belong
investigate
here?
further, or is it because you're physically being moved by someone?
My favorite one. My favorite one is when the receptionist. Yeah, here we go. The receptionist gives a pitying smile and relents, nodding to the security guards nearby. Oh, of course, he says with all the honesty of a street peddler.
Yeah, that was the part I was referring to, where
Yeah,
it's
I wanna
like
hear
they're being
about this
very
person.
shady.
Yeah.
Same thing.
That definitely was the line that stuck out to me. I'm like, oh wait, is he patronizing me right now? Am I actually being institutionalized?
They're like measuring you for the straitjacket. Like, hold still.
It's like that part in Back to the Future Part 3 where the Undertaker's going up to Marty and
Yeah, exactly.
He seems to be engaging him in conversation, but he's measuring him for the coffin the whole time.
Yeah. I feel like that's a pretty not super common, but that's definitely like an insane asylum trope. Where there's a lot of stories, like movies and TV shows, where someone's like, "No, I'm just here to find information." And there's a recent movie it's either coming out or just came out. That's that same. It's like this woman.
Oh yeah, it's like some stalker. Yeah, I think it
Yeah.
hasn't come out yet. Yeah.
That the whole time I saw that trailer, I was thinking, this is really cool because it's that same kind of unreliable narrator where you're not sure if she's insane or if she's super telling the truth. And yeah.
Yeah, and the whole being institutionalized against your will is definitely a trope.
That's a huge fear too. Like that's that's really horrifying.
There's also 2 classic episodes of both Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Star Trek: The Next Generation where there's a character like getting screwed with, where they don't know if their whole reality has been a lie and they've been in an insane asylum the whole time, or they've just been being messed with. So
oh yeah, you got me to watch one of those, the Riker one.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, that one. Yeah. Holy moly.
Frame of mind, yeah.
They also do a great episode of Community where they do that.
Oh boy.
It's hilarious.
I have just started Community. We were watching it a little bit earlier before we played a couple games, but that's a good show.
Yeah.
Is that the later seasons, I assume?
Yeah, it's like, I want to say season 3.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I look forward to that.
So Matt, speaking of like these intros, and obviously there's the dream sequence and stuff, that last time you were on the podcast, you said you're kind of like, oh, this is the thing I'm most proud of, this pack that's coming out next, and we were all kind of blown away. What's your favorite scenario / story moment or player card? Let's go with scenario or story moment that you're most proud of in this campaign.
From like during the gameplay of a scenario, or in between scenarios, or
either or
both?
Or both?
Either or. I still really like the dream sequence for the moment that you flip the page and think, it's one of these. And I really like what is it, Dream 5 or so, where it's you looking in a mirror and thinking, oh, this isn't Dream 1, because it's the first one on the list. So if you're going in order, it teaches you to not go in order. But I think, as far as during gameplay,
and that was intentional, I assume, that they were all listed out of order.
Yeah. It's supposed to evoke the feeling that you're lost. Did you never see that?
No,
that's amazing.
Because I was paying attention to things.
Right? Yeah. So if you're what happened was, we noticed during playtesting that a lot of people were just flipping the page and going to the first one.
Mm-hmm. So Dream 5, which is listed first, like if you were just reading this like a book, this is where you would go. You peer in the mirror and your reflection gives you a curious glance. Wait a second. This isn't Dream 1, you say. Continue with Dream 1.
That's awesome. I've never read that before.
Yeah. That's amazing.
So I really like that. As far as during gameplay, I think the sickening reality cards in The Last King are some of my favorites, and not just for the text that's written on them, but also the art. It was a lot of fun to have those artists working on both versions of those VIPs, and I think they had a ton of fun working on them too. And the art department really loves them. And it was also one of the most stark moments of body horror in the card game. There's not a lot of that usually, so it's pretty striking when it happens. So just looking at those art pieces is kind of revolting in a cool way.
Ashley really sticks out to me as the one that kind of creeped me out the most. The singer.
Oh yeah.
She, yeah. Speaking of body horror, that's
the artist for Ashley is Jeff Lee Johnson, who is one of our art directors now.
Oh, I think I met him.
He's also the art director for Arkham.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Now you know.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just looking through the other dreams here to see if I've missed anything. The problem is, I really should go back after I've played these things a few times and just kind of explore everything. But for the most part, I don't read it unless I'm playing through it. So, occasionally on an odd campaign where I'll have something happen that never happened before, I'll get to see something new.
I think in this cycle, more than in Dunwich cycle, there's a lot more things that you could miss and then find upon replaying the scenario, which is important to me because I think replayability is really important for the longevity of the game. And you'll probably see more of that over time.
Awesome. So, so talking about things, miscibles, is that something that you have a clear thought, when you start, I want to, intricately weave X, Y, and Z in, or are those things that kind of come to you as you go, where you're like, I could put the symbol here, and it's not going to actually matter until the last scenario, and let's see if anyone notices.
There are definitely some that I outlined from the beginning, and then there are others that come up naturally throughout the course of development. There are some that don't even get thrown in until later, like Dream 5 or whatever. That wasn't thrown in until near the end when I realized that a lot of people were flipping the page and not, anyway. But there are some that are definitely planned from the beginning, so it's kind of a mix.
Okay.
But I'm like really heavily inspired by video games and books that, upon rereading or replaying, have things that you missed the first time and think, oh, whoa, oh, this changes everything. Or I especially love in a video game where there's a level that was secret. That's my favorite thing. Seriously, that's like my favorite thing in the world. Like Dark Souls and Bloodborne both do that a lot, and they're two of my favorite games, where you'll go through an area and you'll beat the boss, and then upon replaying the game, you'll go through that same area and you'll find a path that you just did not see before. And you start walking down that path and it opens up and you think, oh my god, this is a whole nother level.
Friggin'
There's a
Keenhurst.
whole nother level here with a completely different boss. And it's optional. And like that blows my mind every time. I love that.
Yeah, and games outside of at least the Soulsborne series, they don't tend to do that a whole lot anymore. Everything's very hand-holdy.
There's some games that do it more than others.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of...
Like Bethesda games do that once in a while, where there's the cool little secret areas to find anything that's kind of open world like that.
Yeah, open world games tend to do that. The Evil Within had a couple areas that were sort of like that. But yeah, I definitely think that the Bloodborne and Souls series do it the best.
Are there any kind of Easter eggs or hints that you really haven't seen the community pick up on yet that you were like, God, I thought everyone would get that?
There's a couple. Well, there's not a lot that I thought everyone would get.
Sure.
That they haven't. I think all the ones that I meant for people to find pretty easily have been found. There's a couple that I haven't seen people talk about, and maybe people have spotted them and just haven't like made forum posts about them or something, or maybe they just haven't been spotted. But yeah, there's definitely a couple that I snuck in there, references to other books in the Carcosa cycle or series that are maybe like really subtle.
Okay.
There's one in particular in my head, but I'm not going to say it.
Go. Oh.
I'll tell you.
Okay, fair enough. Sorry, listeners.
Well, I like the idea that maybe, in a year, someone will post on Facebook, hey guys, I spotted this thing. I didn't even realize, or something. But, nothing super mind-blowing, just little nuggets here and there of clues that I personally find interesting. Yeah.
So, I guess talking still about specific scenarios, Black Star's Rise, I think... Okay, I'm back and forth. Black Star's Rise and Pallid Mask are kind of go back and forth for me on the high point of the campaign. But the whole double agenda thing I thought was really interesting. Where did that come from? Because I know, just in talking with you before, kind of every scenario has its own hook, and
right.
that's the hook for that one. But
yeah.
Like, where do you start when you go like, hey, this core mechanic of the game? Now we're just going to throw it out this scenario and do something kind of different.
That actually came from Nate. Me and Nate like to sit down at the outside.
That seems like a really Nate joke. Yeah. Where you're like, hey Nate, we need a new idea for the scenario.
Let's do it.
And he goes, 2 agendas.
Actually, he posed it a slightly different way, but yeah, it was basically like that. We like to, at the outset of every cycle, sit down and come up with some of those hooks, right? So that's where like Echoes of the Past came from, where it says, what if the hook is the cultists are looking for clues instead of you? Which I turned into, we were both looking for clues at the same time. So for Black Star's Rise, I basically told Nate the pitch for the scenario, like what the scenario is meant to be. And he said, what if there's no act deck? And I said, okay. 1, I like it. 2, how? And I think he said something along the lines of, what if the act deck is, like, you gotta find it? And I said, okay, man, I'll run with that. But at the same time, I was looking at the cards and I'm thinking, the agenda and the act decks make a book. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, this is going to look really weird graphically if it's just half a book. So I kind of still wanted there to be the other half of the book. And that led to, they're both agendas.
Yep.
It was like pretty quickly afterwards, I thought, they're both agendas. And one's good and one's bad.
Did the idea of Carcosa being either above or below come from that, or was that an idea first?
It was kind of a happy coincidence where I thought, okay, there's 2 agendas. One's going to be good and one's going to be bad. And I definitely don't want it to be the same one every time. It's got to be random every time, because otherwise there's no, upon replaying the scenario, there's no danger at all. And then when I started writing the sort of segue into dim Carcosa and trying to think about, okay, the transportation, how does this actually work? It all just kind of came together. I was thinking like, well, it could be either something above or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because that's honestly what sold me on that scenario. Because, the above kind of made sense because you see all the spires and you
Right.
see the mirror image and it's in some of the art. But then as I started to go through and you kind of realize like that's what it's going toward. Like my personal phobia is like thalassophobia. Like deep,
yeah.
dark water
Me
scares
too.
the crap out of me.
Me too.
So the whole idea of you might think it's above, but then all of a sudden, I can't remember which, it might be a location flavor text where you see Hastur down below beckoning
it's
you
the,
into the water. Like that, I had to take a minute.
It's the what's it called? The little, not the abbey, but the
shack.
it's. I mean, I wouldn't describe it as a shack, but I know what you're talking about. It's the same one. Yeah.
Chapel?
Yeah, the chapel of St. Albert. That's it.
Yep.
Yeah, and I love also the idea that if you're opening the flood below and you're opening the path below, I mean, the reason why that works is because the image of Carcosa above you is being reflected on the water, so when you fall into the water, you just fall down onto Carcosa.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that idea.
I kind of like too how with Black Star's Rise having the double agenda, it feels similar to the penultimate scenario in Dunwich, where it's like, okay, shit's getting real now. And in this one, it's like, you don't even have an act deck. Like, you have double agendas, right? Like, there's so much evil and
Yeah.
all this stuff's coming at you. And even talking about above and below, and now left and right, like agenda and act. Now it's left, right is evil, up, down is evil. Like, everywhere you look is just horror. And
Yeah.
like the feeling of that to me was just awesome.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you can't resign from that scenario, right?
You cannot.
Yeah.
Correct.
So it's you're right from the get go. You're stuck and surrounded by horrible on all sides. Yeah, I think our marketing writers had a really fun time writing that article.
I
For that
think
exact reason.
I think that was one of my favorite blind plays ever. Like, that was the most confused I've ever been playing, and not in a bad way. Like, in a way of like, what the hell am I supposed to do here?
Yeah, that's the thing. The first time I played it, I'm like, what's the game? I just...
And right, that was the danger of not having an act deck, because the whole point of the act deck is to direct you, is to give you a goal. So the danger there was, that was one of those moments where I was curious to see if in playtesting this would be too confusing or frustrating, and the playtesters were confused, but not so much that they were frustrated. At least from my experience, like from what I could tell.
Yeah, because you write it out, and eventually you're like, okay.
Right. And I think a lot of players have gotten to that point where they're, after they set up the scenario, as long as they've set it up accurately, there are some scenarios where they're thinking, okay, how am I gonna do this? And if you just trust in the plot to work out, it'll work out. Like Undimensioned and Unseen is another one that's like that, where it's like, kill as many broods as you can. And you're like, great, let me read this brood. Oh, I can't hurt it. All right. Oh, I can hurt it if I have an esoteric formula. I don't know. I don't have that. How do I get
It's
that?
a side out of play. What the?
Okay, I have it now, but I have to put clues. Okay, how do I put clues on them? Right? It's sort of like this 3-step removed process of you have to figure out how to kill them, and that's a constant like point of maybe confusion, but like in a good way. Yeah.
I certainly felt that confusion too, starting out in that scenario, because I was like, okay,
Yeah.
I don't, and like you said, I didn't have an act deck to guide me, right? Like I don't have this objective, and I just kind of defaulted. I'm like, well, clues are good usually,
Yeah.
so I'm just gonna open up the map and get clues. I guess.
Yeah, and I definitely built the rest of the scenario in such a way that if you don't know what to do and you fall back on your instincts, you'll probably be okay.
Yeah, I was not. In the blind playthrough, I definitely was not good on that scenario. But not because of your... I forgot that shriveling kills things. But anyways.
Yeah, usually.
Yeah.
The thing I really liked about it is it was like that confusion was like what I imagined the investigator would be in that situation. Like, you're just suddenly in this crazy location with a storm below and this, portal opening above, and like what the hell are you supposed to do in that situation? So,
well, actually, it's funny you bring that up, because I kind of feel like, and this is how I wrote that scenario with this in mind. I kind of feel like at that point in the campaign, the investigators have more information than the players do.
Right.
Like they know to head to Mont Saint Michel, and you're not exactly sure why. And they know how this ritual is working, but you're not exactly sure why. And a lot of that narrative in that particular scenario is written in such a way where the investigators have a set goal in mind, and you're not even quite sure what that is. So yeah, I think that's kind of interesting in a way.
Yeah, I definitely think that's that makes sense, and that kind of like how you have to decide whether to hedge your bets, and kind of pursuing both agendas or just go all out in one leads to some interesting decisions.
Now, how did you guys do that on your blind play? Because I think like after you figure out what's going on there, the subsequent plays become easier, obviously. But did you guys like load up both agendas simultaneously, or did you go hard on one and then hard on the other?
I kind of did the single one. I was like, well, because the way it worked,
because of the skull.
Well, that, and also when a doom is like out in play, like on a player card or something, it counts for both. And I was like, that seems doubly bad. So why don't I just go through one, deal with everything it has to do, and then I'll go through the other. So that was my plan.
As long as you pick right.
For me, I have this amazing ability to guess wrong every single time, at least the first few times. So I tend to hedge more, and then I just try to motor through to the later locations, which will kind of give you an indication of what is the right one if you haven't gotten there yet.
I think I'm 2 out of 5 on guessing correctly, so yeah, not great.
Matt, so talk about Mont Saint Michel. And it being like this awesome location. Did you have a favorite enemy or location or treachery in this cycle that really you're proud of? Because I mean, so many good locations too, like the catacombs and the theater was awesome. Insane Asylum.
There's definitely a few. Yeah, it's hard to only pick one because there are so many good ones, and
you pick as many as you want.
I can't choose based on art because the art in this cycle is so good all throughout.
Yeah,
there's so many good art pieces. So I'll kind of just pick based on personal preference, I guess. As far as enemies go, my favorite is probably the Organist. I love the way that the art turned out for that card, and I also love the dual nature of it, and how depending on whether you're doing the doubt route or the conviction route, the Organist is either this deadly foe that's trying to kill you the whole time, or this mysterious guy that you want to learn more about. And I also found it interesting because when reading in the Court of the Dragon, which is the story where that A Phantom of Truth basically is inspired by, the Organist is this figure that really, by all accounts, shouldn't be that scary. He's